Young people will never afford a home. Thank God. For most of the 20th century, homeownership was the rational financial decision. Roof over your head, long-term stability, and gradual appreciation in an economy defined by strong wage growth, predictable careers, and low asset prices relative to income. And man, something to call your own. Pride. Over time, this became the expectation. Buying a home became, and I can't stress this enough, an expected milestone. But that's just not the reality anymore. Today, owning a home has transformed from a broadly accessible wealth-building tool into a highly leveraged, illiquid, time-sensitive commitment. The economic conditions that once justified early ownership have materially changed. And because of that, being priced out of housing is not necessarily a failure of yours, maybe a financial safeguard. Could it be that it is the best for Gen Z and beyond? Home ownership worked historically because prices, incomes, and financing terms were aligned. In 1970, the median U.S. price of a home was approximately $23,000, while median household income was roughly $9,000. That's a price-to-income ratio of about 2.5, which is normal for that time. Mortgage debt was much smaller, down payments were more meaningful, and buyers generally could and generally did rely on a single income. Today, median U.S. home prices exceed $400,000, while median household income is around $85,000. This implies a price-to-income ratio between 4.7 and 5 nationally, but can be well above 10 in major metropolitan areas such as LA, San Francisco, or New York. Taking on debt was permissible in the 1970s and 80s because modest leverage amplified appreciation on a relatively inexpensive asset. Today, extreme leverage is often required simply to enter the market. When prices stagnate or interest rates rise, leverage obviously works in reverse, and it can get nasty. Here's an example. A 1980 buyer purchasing a $50,000 home with a 20% down payment borrowed $40,000. A 3% real appreciation rate produced a modest but steady gain on a manageable balance. Now, with a 2026 buyer purchasing a, let's say, $600,000 home, which is actually probably a more realistic price figure than the national average for many of you, and let's say you can scrape together $30K somehow to put down 5%. And let's not act like $30K is a small amount of money. That's a lot of money. And this barely gets you in. This means you have to borrow $570,000. A few percentage point dip in the market can wipe out your equity, and the slightest increase in interest rates can skyrocket your monthly payments, costing you thousands more annually, which is exactly what's happened over the past few years to many with variable rate mortgages. And you might think, okay, well then just save 20% and you'll have more equity. Well, it's not like a lot of us have $120,000 coming out of you-know-where. A lot of folks do not have six figures lying around to do that. And if they did, it would have taken them a while to save that versus it being invested in something much more productive. Now, let me be clear. All of the following is in relation to residential real estate, like living in a home, not buying a home and renting it out, or the business of real estate. You see, a primary residence is widely described as an asset, but in economic terms, and I say this all the time, it's more like a consumption good with a financial overlay. Where you live and how you live, I don't think should be a money-making proposition, but rather a life choice. A consumption choice once you have the means to make that decision. An investment asset generates cash flow or appreciates due to productive output. If you own a business, the business should, in theory, profit, make money. Owner-occupied housing does not generate any cash flow unless it's converted into a rental, and its utility is just simply consumed through living in it. The house doesn't gain any value outside of the market itself, or if there's heavy renovations that are made to improve the theoretical market value. The homeowner consumes the housing service just as a renter does, but assumes additional financial obligations in exchange for that ownership. Mortgage interest, property taxes, insurance, maintenance, repairs, these aren't investments. They are consumption costs. Maintenance and repairs alone typically cost 1 to 2% of the home's value annually. On a $600,000 home, that equates to $6,000 to $12,000 annually before anything. Price appreciation is often cited as evidence that housing is an investment. Look how much my house went up. My grandpa's house is worth $1 million now. Yeah, it only took 40 years of cost to get there. Why does that never, ever get factored in when people talk about this? Because it doesn't fit the narrative. How much percent did they pay in closing costs? It was probably 6 to 8% of the home's value. So So what's really your return here? It's well understood that it's pretty reasonable to expect an 8 to 10% long-term return in the US stock market, assuming broad diversification and a low, steady Eddie sort of indexed investing approach in the markets. This looks like 6 to 8% after inflation. Now, let's assume you have an amazing outcome with owning a home, a wonderful outcome, an outcome that people dream about, the home doubling in value. This is of course rare, but I want to show you what the math actually looks like when your home doubles. And let's say it doubles in 10 years, which again is unlikely and is a best case scenario, but let's just say it does. You buy a home for $500K. You put 20% down, which is $100K. This means you take out a $400,000 mortgage, and let's just call it 4.5% to be fair. And let's say it's for 25 to 30 years. And let's say you live in the home for 10 years. Over that decade, home value doubles. It's worth $1 million now. On the surface, this sounds incredible. Your home doubled. Case closed. What's there to even talk about? Let's actually follow the money. First, the ongoing cost of owning a home. You pay property tax of about 1% per year. The home starts at $500K and ends at $1 million. The average value over the 10-year period is, let's just call it $750,000. At 1%, your annual property tax averages $7,500. Over 10 years, you pay $75,000 in property tax. Next is maintenance and repairs. Again, assume a conservative 1% per year. It can be much more than that, but let's just say 1%. Let's feed the example here. That's another $7,500 per year. And again, that's lucky. That's pretty limited. Over 10 years, that's $75,000. And of course, you got to pay insurance too. Assume $1,500 per year. Over 10 years, that's $15,000. Add it together. Property tax, $75K. Maintenance and repairs, $75K. Insurance, $15K. Total ownership costs over that 10 years is $165,000. That's $165,000 gone. Cost of doing business. Now, let's look at your mortgage. You took out a $400,000 mortgage at 4.5%. Your monthly payment would be somewhere around $2K. Let's call it $2,025. Over 10 years, you make roughly $243,000 in mortgage payments. Of that amount, about $80,000 goes towards the principal and about $163,000 goes towards interest. Only the $80K increases your equity. Now, let's fast forward to the sale. You sell the home for $1 million. You pay closing and selling costs of around 6 to 8%. So let's call it 7%, that's $70,000. That's $930K left before paying off the mortgage. After 10 years, your remaining mortgage balance is around $320,000. Subtract that and you walk away with about $610,000 in cash. But let's reconcile everything. Here is the cash that permanently left your pocket. Down payment, $100K. Taxes, maintenance, insurance, $165K. So total cash invested, $265,000. Here is what you get back. Cash from the sale, $610K. Your true profit is the difference. $610K minus $265K equals $345,000. That's your actual gain over 10 years. Now, let's translate that into a return. You put in $265,000 over 10 years. You got back $610K. That's a total multiple of around 2.3 times your money. It's a pretty good return. Annualized, that works out to roughly 8.7% per year nominal. Now adjust for inflation. Assume inflation is around the historical average of 2%. Your real inflation adjusted return drops down to 6.7% per year. That is the best case housing scenario. Your home doubled in value in 10 years. Like that's unlikely. You see homes double in value in a few years in these outlier examples, but like for a home to really double in value in 10 years is super rare and super lucky. And your return is basically the base case, the average of what a stock market investor would want. So in a really lucky, really outlier outcome, best case, you just match what's normal for the stock market. More often, the average home return is much less than that. So it would be much less than the stock market. But I wanted to illustrate that even the home doubling in value is pretty average over 10 years. The other thing to understand is that the appreciation in a primary residence is largely unusable. If a home rises in value from, let's say, $500K to $1 million, the homeowner is not $500,000 richer in any functional sense unless the home is sold or you refinance. It's paper money. Selling eliminates the housing service, aka you can't live in there anymore, and forces you to re-enter the same inflated market that you probably are in unless you go to a lower cost of living area. And if you refinance, you're just taking on more debt, taking on more risk. In contrast, financial assets like stocks, ETFs, they appreciate independently of consumption. A stock portfolio can compound while still providing liquidity, diversification, and flexibility. Homeownership is frequently described as forced savings as well. And while I think this forced savings can be beneficial for people, maybe our parents, in some ways, thank God that our parents did that and they didn't blow the money, right? I understand that. It's still a wildly suboptimal strategy from a wealth building perspective. This framing also obscures the actual cash flow dynamics of a mortgage. In a standard 25-year mortgage at current rates, a substantial majority of the early payments go towards the interest. That's how it's amortized. It doesn't go towards your equity. For example, that $400,000 mortgage that we talked about at 4.5, the reason why there was so much interest paid is because the interest is front loaded in the mortgage. You don't get that equity pay down in a big way until much later into the term. And I've mentioned that housing equity is also illiquid. And to be more precise, it cannot be partially sold, easily rebalanced, or quickly accessed without penalty. You can't access that money. That's why it's illiquid, right? Versus stocks, you could sell it and pay down whatever, assuming it's not in a retirement account that's locked away and you're just investing. Yeah, if you needed to, you could access it. It's probably not wise. You should probably just leave it and let it compound, but it's there. It can easily be converted to cash. During downturns, this illiquidity becomes an issue. Federal Reserve data from the 2008 financial crisis showed that heavily leveraged homeowners experience way greater financial distress than renters who had liquid assets, even when nominal net worths were way higher for those homeowners before the crash. I think that's pretty evident, but again, net worth doesn't tell the full story all the time. The other thing to note is that residential real estate also introduces extreme concentration risk for many who simply just plow their savings into their home. Further, Federal Reserve data shows that for the median homeowner, a primary residence accounts for 60 to 80% of their net worth. That is insane. That is most of your exposure to one asset in one area doing one thing, you living in it. And yes, that value of living in it has inherent value, but it's not a productive asset like a business is. Timing risk also plays into it, as housing requires a large one-time purchase. You're putting a bunch of money all at once. What if you bought at a bad time, like a lot of people did in 2021? A lot of people bought at the peak, and 4 to 5 years later, they're still underwater. A buyer purchasing a US home in 2006 often did not recover real home value until after 2016, according to Case-Shiller Index data. Over that same decade, a diversified equity investor definitely had some turbulence, but was riding into one of the strongest bull markets in history. And yes, you could certainly apply that to equity markets and say, what if there's a lost decade for a certain asset class you're invested into? I know the argument works both ways, but it's about being fully concentrated in one thing, and a lot of things being outside of your control with that thing. Ideally, in markets, you're diversified. You have US exposure, international exposure, maybe some bond exposure, something like that. You are broadly diversified. You have a lever to control that. You can change that sort of on a whim. Once you buy the home, that's it. You better do well or else. If we look at residential housing returns, historically, it's been anywhere from 2 to 3% per year. Broad equity markets with things like the S&P 500, again, this is 6 to 7% after inflation is what you can reasonably expect. Quite a lot more. Now, one of the most underappreciated costs of homeownership is opportunity cost. Capital that's committed to a down payment cannot compound elsewhere. You are tying up so much money. The other thing about investing into your home and just having that as your investment is, again, you do not know how well you're going to do until you actually sell the thing. And that can be decades into the future. It's not a useful thing. I mean, sure, you can lend against it, but that's just taking on debt, which usually isn't a great thing if you have to lend against your home. You have a real every single day marker on your wealth, which maybe is good in some ways, not so good in others, with stock market investing, with other aspects. With your home, it's kind of like, I think I'm doing well because comparables did well because my neighbor's home sold for a certain amount and I think they're kind of similar to mine, but maybe they did some upgrades and I know they have a pool and I don't have a pool, and it's such a speculative thing. You have no idea until there's an actual transaction. So overall, you are getting a not so good return You just aren't. You're probably not going to make a ton of money on your home. And don't get me wrong with any of this. Housing affordability is a genuine social issue. And I do not want it to seem like I'm just letting those who are in charge off the hook for basically breaking the system and being like, well, maybe it's good that the system's broken. I hope that's not what you think I'm saying. Supply constraints, restrictive zoning, and the financialization of residential real estate have driven prices beyond the realm of possibility for many young people. These are structural problems that deserve policy attention. It's an issue. And I believe it's an issue that young folks can't buy homes. It's not good. But with any of this kind of stuff, you have to look at things as they are, not as you wish them to be. My point with this entire thing is that housing, as it is today, should not be a speculative decision, a money-making decision. Because the system is so broken and the real estate market is not great, it's so inflated in so many areas, making a financial argument over it just doesn't really make sense anymore. That is the point. You should ideally be able to get a cheap home and fix it up and make some money. Like, that's great. I want that to be the case, but that's just not how it is anymore. And so you're having these people that had that experience, that had that market say, this is how you do it, but it's completely different now. And so because it's very different, there are alternatives to it. There are other ways to build your wealth. And even back then, the most rich people didn't make their wealth, flipping their home. Like, you don't talk to a rich person and say, how'd you get rich? Well, I just kept flipping home after home after home, but I didn't do anything else and I got mega wealthy. No, they own a business. It's ownership, or they are invested, or they're early at a company or something like that. But it's not from that. You get nominal wealth building from it, and you can have a pretty okay life in the right circumstances. But right now, again, doesn't make sense. It needs to be a lifestyle decision, and you need to have a really strong financial base and liquidity in general to be able to comfortably afford a home that's that expensive, because they're all expensive. Being a homeowner sounds cool, and it's great to say to people at the bar, you have a house, you have responsibilities, you have a mortgage over your head, and for a lot of people, you are kind of poor now because you've dumped all your money into it. It's not as great as you think it is. At an individual level, if you're priced out of real estate, you can still build wealth, and you can pretty much get rich over the decades. In fact, it is much more likely that that'll happen if you focus in the right ways on those asset classes. Don't think of it as like, oh, it's an advantage that I can't afford it. It's like, okay, well, I can focus building my wealth in a different area, and I don't have to completely focus on my life being indexed against real estate and how much my, neighbor's house sold for. Your wealth shouldn't be fully tied to that anyway. Because you pretty much have to rent in a lot of cases, it can normalize early and consistent investing. It preserves your mobility, it supports your career advancement, and it aligns financial behavior with modern economic conditions rather than outdated animal spirits that believe that that's the way it should be done. It's a different world. Many young people will never afford a home. Maybe it's for the best. Not because exclusion is desirable, but because exclusion from an outdated financial script creates space for better decision-making. Homeownership is not inherently bad. It just is not simply the default wealth-building strategy it once was. Wealth is built through ownership of productive assets, diversification, disciplined saving, and time. These principles are more directly and reliably accessed through market investing, building your career, or growing your business. That's the way you're gonna get rich. Not flipping residential real estate, hoping you hit the jackpot, because you probably never will. The tools for building wealth have evolved. Persisting in the belief that early homeownership is a prerequisite for financial success ignores the data, it ignores the risks, it ignores opportunity cost. It's just not smart. In that context, being unable to buy is not necessarily a setback, but more so an alignment with reality. And it's probably the foundation of a more resilient path to wealth.